let's get into the nitty-gritty details. So RSS stands for really simple syndication. Kind of a misnomer. It's not that simple. It's pretty simple syndication. I would call it PSS. A textual format on the web for news feeds or web feeds, essentially things that get updated pretty frequently. So it uses XML, this extensible markup language that's basically just HTML to present information that's pretty much frequently reported. So there's a lot of RSS feeds for news, weather, sports scores, and blogs. It's generally in a summary form with links to the originals. And the reason that it's done like this is so that you can have tools that can parse them and display it. So if you are on like Windows, they have like that notification center that has just a bunch of like news or weather or stuff like that usually. That's basically RSS. It just provides a way to present information that is constantly updated. It became a de facto standard in the early 2000s. There's actually two standards. We will use RSS 2.0, aka RSS 2. Star. The star just means that if they update it, we don't want to be wrong. So it could be 2.1 at this point. I'm not 100% sure. Okay, so the relationship of RSS to XML. An RSS 2.0 feed is a well-formed XML. The vice versa, or the, what is it, the contrapositive? I forget, I don't know, is not true. So a well-formed XML feed is not always going to be an RSS feed. It's kind of like, I hope I get this right, but it's like every square is a rectangle, but not every rectangle is a square. I don't know if that's the right way. It might be the other way around. Okay, cool. I got a nod. So, okay. An RSS feed meets additional specifications beyond being XML. So certain tags, certain required or optional attributes, or certain or required optional elements, et cetera, et cetera. So there are special things about RSS that make it separate from XML, separate things that must be the case. And we will dive into what those are right now. So here's an example RSS feed. You will notice it looks very similar to both an XML feed and an HTML feed because all RSS feeds are XML feeds. So let's dive into it. The top level element is RSS. So it is an RSS tag, and it has a required version attribute whose value must be 2.0. So when I talk about how RSS feeds will have special characteristics about them, this is one of those characteristics. All RSS feeds will start with a root node called RSS, which has to have a version attribute, which has to have a value of 2.0. So unlike in XML feeds, where if you wanted to test if there was an attribute or if it had an attribute, you had to test it, or if the tag was of some value, when you're working with RSS feeds, you can automatically assume that this is going to be true, which is cool because it saves you a bunch of code. You don't have to type tree.hasAttribute version, tree.isTag, tree.label equals RSS. All of those things are inferred based on it being an RSS feed. There is exactly one required channel element inside the RSS element. So you can assume that there will be a channel element as a child of the RSS tag. These three elements are required, but may appear in any order. So you're going to have a child called title, you're going to have a child called link, and you're going to have a child called description as children of this channel tag. Another thing you can assume. And if it seems like we're getting a lot of things that you can assume that you have to remember, there is a very cool diagram coming up that basically just tells you everything that is required or optional or required if something else is required, and so on and so forth. And then finally, there can be 0 or more item elements within a channel. Each has at least a title or description element within it, but these may appear in any order. So item tags, there are 0 or more of them under this RSS tag, root tag. And each of them has to have at least a title or description. So if it has a title, it might also have a description. If it doesn't have a title, it has to have a description because one is required. And here is that beautiful picture I just talked about or alluded to 30 seconds ago. Set this as your desktop wallpaper for when you're doing the RSS project because it's very useful. It tells you in the red here, these things are required. So you're required to have an RSS tag. You're required at least one channel tag. The channel tag is required to have these 3 children. It looks like if you have a link, which is required, then you have to have an actual content tag, which takes you to that link. These orange tags, at least one of them is required. So as I mentioned, the item tags have to have one of either a title or a description. And then the last type is, or I guess the third to last type, is that if the parent is present, then this must be required. So if you have an item tag that has a link child, it must have a content tag. Same with publication date. And then everything here is not required. You'll notice if an item has a source tag, this attribute here is required. So it must have a attribute value URL, and that attribute value must point to the URL of an RSS feed. This is something you would want to star because it's pretty important. There's a project with RSS called RSS Aggregator where it'll save you a lot of code because you don't have to check a lot of these things. You can assume them, which is cool. Okay, and then here's a summary. Properties of the XML tree from an RSS 2.0 feed. Root node has an RSS node with a version attribute whose value is 2.0. There's one channel node as the child of the root. The channel node has certain required nodes, title, link, description, in no particular order. And then it can have 0 or more item child nodes plus other optional children. And then if it has an item child, each of those item childs must have certain attributes. So it must have either a title or description. If it has a link or a pub date, these children, these content nodes are required. If it has a source node or if it has a source child, which it's not required to do, but if it does, then it must have this attribute value URL. No particular order is required among the children of an item node, but for each item node, at least one of its children must be a title or description node. And that's it, 10 minutes, speed run. Okay, any questions about RSS? Okay, any questions about the midterm now? Who has questions? Yes.
It's a formal parameter.
Yes. Let me go to the sample midterm. Sample exam. Which question is it? 1.2. So consider the following method signature, private static int exam score, int student number. Here, student number is called a formal parameter. So a distinguished variable. Variables are different than parameters. Variables are things that you would instantiate in the code. An argument is when you would actually call this method. So if you called exam score, then you pass in student ID like 588 218. When you're passing it in to a static method, this is when it becomes an argument. But when you're talking about it in terms of the method signature, it's called a distinguished formal parameter there. And then an index doesn't really make sense as an answer. So it would be C, a formal parameter there. Yeah.
For the one under 1.3, how do we know if it's like by check style?
Okay, suppose the method from question 1.2 is called in the following statement. This call would int x private static int exam score equals student number. The call would I believe it's I don't think there's an answer key, but I'm fairly certain that the answer is E, because 42 in this case would be a magic number. We don't know if it would assign an exam score of 42 to student K because we don't know the contract of exam score. We don't know what the requires or the ensures clause states, or we don't know what the contract states at all. Exam score could be a method that just prints out like a bunch of text and then returns -52 no matter what. We can't assume based on the name of the method what it does. That's what the contracts are for. We also can't assume it'll print out the exam score of student 42 because, again, we don't know the contract. It wouldn't cause a program to crash because we're passing in the correct parameter here as an argument, which is an integer student number. And we're setting it equal to an integer, which is the return type. So that wouldn't be the case. And I don't know why it would be a compile time error because it's compiled correctly. Okay. Other questions? Yes.
Where I was a variable with so we consider
So you're saying like x equals I plus 2?
yeah, and it would 2 still be considered
Yes, integer literal. This would be an expression. 2 in this case would also be an expression technically because it's just evaluating to an integer. But if you get to a question where it's like, hey, underline all of the expressions, always go with whatever the larger one is, right? So if you have 2 Booleans, A and B, and then you have, oh God, I'm not typing the ampersand, but I can't. It's like that. Technically, A is an expression, it evaluates something. Technically, B is an expression, it evaluates something. But the correct thing to do would be to underline the entire expression. Okay. Other questions? Yes.
In an exam like a mass signature and we have a precondition, is it safe to assume that we don't have to check the precondition in the massive value?
Yes, because you can assume that whoever, you're the implementer in that case, right? If you're writing a method, then you can assume that what the user passes to you will pass the preconditions. Because otherwise, you can do whatever you want. Like if the precondition is that x is greater than 0, and then the user enters in -1, your code can do anything. So you only have to worry about the case when the preconditions are checked. It's the beauty of design by contract. Okay, another thing I'll bring up because I'll just start talking now, but people always seem to get tripped up on this. But one thing, this was an attendance question one time, but I'll make sure that we still remember. If you have an expression such as this, oh, well, you need to give it a variable name. Double I equals 1 divided by 2. What would the resulting value of this be? 0.0. Right? Because here's the steps that the computer takes. It's going to say, hey, setting double I into something, let me evaluate this expression. Well, 1 divided by 2 is 0.5. Okay, but since we're both integers, I have to cast this down. So this is technically 0. But then I'm setting it equal to a double, and 0 is not a double, so I have to make it 0.0. The same would be true if, say, we did like good one here. 5 divided by 11. What happens is double will say, okay, 5 divided by 11 is like what, like 2 point something, 2 point something, right? Yeah, that makes sense. And then it's going to say, okay, well, they're just both integers, so I have to cast it down to 2. But I'm setting it equal to a double, so it's going to be 2.7. That's a big thing to remember. It's the conversion of doubles to integers. Now, if say we went back to our first example here, and we made just one of these variables a double, so 1.0 divided by 2, what would happen is Java would say, okay, 1.0 divided by 2, but one of these is a double, so just to be safe, let me make sure that the resulting value is also a double, 0.5, and Java will say, okay, it's a double, 0.5, and then we're setting it equal to a double, so 0.5 is a-okay. That's yes.
So if it was just one, like without the point out divided by 2, and you said the answer was 0, would that be wrong? You have to specify it's 0.
It would be more wrong than saying 0.0. So if it was a multiple choice question where say like A was 0.5, B was 0, C was 0.0, and D was like error or whatever. Yeah. C would be the better answer in this case because it's done.
Would you get partial points for picking 0?
No, there are no partial points, unfortunately, on the multiple choice at least. There are on the other questions. Okay, other questions. Yeah.
So I checked like one of the practice tests and it was like they put double I equals 1.0 divided by 2 and they underlined it for some reason.
That's like an error.
There is a one with like 1.0 and 2.0 at the same time.
Oh, this was like a code that somebody wrote.
Yes.
Okay. Well, I grade the midterms, and I would not take off for that. So you're fine. So don't worry about that. And now that I've said it, I can't take off once. So even if Bucci tells me to, just don't tell me when. I don't want to get fired. Okay. Other questions? Okay. Another big concept then. If we have private, static, void, Foo. Always foo. And X. Y. X equals X times 2. Y equals Y plus 7. Turning anything, and then now down here in our main code, and this is like main, public static void main. I'm not writing all that. I'm lazy. And then we say int A equals 4, int B equals 6. Space. And then I call foo A B. What are the values of A and B going to be after this call? 4 and 6, right? Because variables are passed by, or sorry, primitive variables are passed by value. So what happens is that we have 4 boxes in memory in this case, right? We have X and Y, and then we have A and B. And A and B get set equal to 4, 6. What happens when we call foo? These values get copied or passed by value into X and Y. So here we have 4 and 6. X is equal to X times 2, so this becomes 8. And Y equals Y plus 7, which makes this 13. Now, method is concluded. We are done with these boxes. Get rid of them. But you'll notice the values are still the same. Please get in the habit of actually drawing out how this happens, because this is a very simple example and it might seem easy and intuitive to understand this part of it. But we're going to get to a point in the semester where instead of passing the actual values, we do what's called pass by reference, which gets a lot more complicated because instead of holding just values, you're holding references to values 4 and 6. And those are what actually get passed into the variables. So if you do update them in a method, they will update them outside of the method. But you don't have to worry about that yet. But just get in the practice of drawing what's happening in memory. Because eventually it will not be as easy as pass by value. And I've seen so many people miss questions about pass by value versus pass by reference because they did not draw pictures. Drawing pictures is fun. Yes.
Do you mean by drawing pictures, do you mean like writing this out?
Yeah. So
Kind of
if
just like any visual representation?
any visual representation, I would usually do like the boxes. So I'd say like O, X, Y, A, B, and understand what's happening, passing by value. Because that way, as soon as the method's done, you can just erase those and you're like, oh, well, these values haven't changed. So the value of A and B after this is still whatever they were. Now, if say this method was public static int, foo, and then we returned X plus Y, and then instead of saying foo AB, we said A equals foo AB. So that'd be 8 plus 13, which is 21. Afterwards, after this method calls, the return value actually does get stored within A. So that is the one way that pass by values will be updated after the method, is if you return a value from the static method and then set that equal to a variable. So don't think that you can't, that the variables will never change. They might change. You can only update one of them. That's your one. Okay. If you also said B equals foo AB, oh, I guess A is updated in this case. Never mind. Bad example, too complicated. I don't want to do it. Okay, questions? Other questions?
I know they're copied up. How did you say it with like pass by value? Like, how did you explain the copying? You don't have, like, you said it in a way, like including the words pass by value.
Yeah, so these are the values of A and B are passed by their value. So the value of A is 4, so that's what gets copied into X is 4. And 6, the value is copied into Y. And then these are separate entities from A and B. So when we modify them within the static method, you're modifying these variables, not these ones. That's why after the static method is concluded, A and B are still the same that they were, even though we've updated X and Y. in the static method. Does that make sense?
Mhm.
Okay. Right. Quick check here. Who is in charge of making sure that the precondition is true? What was that? The client. So the client that calls the method is in charge of making sure that the precondition is true. Who's in charge of making sure that the postcondition is true? The implementer is in charge of making sure that the ensures clause is true. Another word for the precondition is a requires clause. Okay. I'll just keep going through the sample exam if nobody has questions. We skipped one, didn't we? Oh, yeah, there's that question. In design by contract, the code responsible for making sure that the preconditions or the requires clause is true when a method is called is the client code that calls the method. That's design by contract. Okay, suppose you want to set the double variable 1, 2, 3 to a random real number uniformly distributed in the interval 1.0 to 3.0. You've made the following declaration: random r equals new random 1l. Noting that next double returns a real number uniformly distributed in the interval 0 to 1. What statement will set 1 to 3 to the desired result? Does anybody want to take a stab at it? Option B, why?
Option 1 does not work because it maps to 0 to 3, and
Mhm.
option D also does the same. Option C does map to 1 to 3, but it does not uniformly distributed.
Yes, exactly. So if you have, if you want to, how do we put this? You're trying to create a uniform distribution between 0 and 2.0. Adding together two random numbers will not give you a uniform distribution. Multiplying by 2.0 will. And that has to do with how Java random numbers work. So always err on the side of using one random number and multiplying it.
Which was the
Correct answer B.
B, okay.
Yeah.
You say the sample exam is a good representation of how it's gonna be, or is it gonna be harder?
That's a good question. I would say when I looked at the exam, it was a bit tougher than what the sample exam was. But I also haven't looked at the short answer and the potential tracing table and the potential method rate that you have to do. But I think if you've done all the labs and you've been caught up with the homework and you've been caught up with the projects, it shouldn't be too bad. I will say, a lot of people, or last semester, a lot of people came into it and were like very used to having averages on tests and exams being in the 90s. That will not be the case. I think the average for my first exam last semester was a 70, and that is pretty good. So temper your expectations because this is not a easy A class by any means. So
Not to be like a total doomer about it, but if you were like, if you did end up with like a 55, is that like, I know you would have to work really hard for the rest of the semester, but would that be like super red alert, or are you still in the game?
I had a student who got a 40 on the first exam and then came to my office hours and was like, Steven, I need to lock in. And that's exactly what he did. And he ended the class, I think, with a B-.
Okay.
So it is, that doesn't mean like you can just like,
Yeah.
oh, I'm gonna fail the first midterm and then just lock in. But it's certainly possible.
It might
So
be time to lock in.
it might be time to lock
Okay,
in.
cool.
And the same is true of the opposite. So I had people who got like 90s to 93s on the first exam, and then they were like, oh, I'm the next Bill Gates and Mark Zuckerberg. I don't need to study at all. And then they got very low scores for the second midterm in the finals. So just because you did well in the first midterm, or if you do well in the first midterm, does not mean you can slack off. And just because you did poorly on the first midterm does not mean you can't lock in and still get a good grade. You should just lock in now. Thanks.
I'm gonna write that down.
Yeah, it's like my professional advice is lock in. Okay. Any questions before we move on to next one? Okay, suppose you wanted to display the image file brutus.jpg in a browser along with some other content, yada, yada, yada. Both the files are in the same folder directory. Which HTML code fragment in index.html will produce the desired result? Note that a well-formatted HTML document such that you want to is an XML document. Okay. Okay, anybody have a guess here? Based on your work in project 1. Yeah. Yeah, it's the only one that's an image tag. So it's kind of a giveaway there. I don't think paragraph can make a type image. And this is just a link, which will link to a brutus.jpg link, which I don't think exists. So B is the answer there. Okay. Short answer, give a clear and concise response. When CheckStyle warns you about a magic number in your code, what does this mean? Explain briefly why this warning is something you, as a software professional, should pay attention to and consider fixing, even if you decide not to change your code to remove the warning for a mere class assignment. Does anybody want to take a stab at this one? If not, I have a pretty good example. Okay, so magic numbers actually came up in my real life this past Saturday, and I almost lost it. I was working on like an app. So let's say you're working on an app and you're currently developing it for like an iPhone 16. And you only use magic numbers. So you only use, say, like 8 pixels from the top and like 8 pixels from the bottom. And those are dimensions that you use. When you move to, say, an iPad, or let's say somebody's running it on like a Nokia from like 2006, and there is only 16 pixels, it's going to just completely mess up your resolution. Magic numbers are bad because you're hard coding information that should be relative. So instead of being 8 pixels, maybe it should be 0.1% of the screen height, or 1% of the screen height, 0.1. The reason that we do this is because we want a single point of control over information within the code. I might have yelled at you about an example before, but let's say that you're programming a game and you have an experience cap, like in Minecraft, where every 100 experience points, you get a new level. So yeah, question. 0.1. Technically, yes, you're right. So you would declare a variable like percentage of screen height, and then you would say percentage of screen height times screen height. Good question. That was actually a test, and you're the only person who passed. Okay, so yeah, do not use. Although I don't think Java will flag 1 or 0 as a magic number, but it still should technically be a magic number. Okay, back to the example. 100 experience points will take you to the next level, but then you're playtesting the game, and suddenly you realize that the game is far too hard or far too difficult, so you want to lower the experience cap. If you have 100 hard coded everywhere in your code, you now have to go through and replace maybe, I don't know, 10, 15, 1,000 different instances of the value 100, which maybe you can just say, oh, I'll control F or control all, and I'll just replace all 100s with 50. But let's say you have another 100, like 100 is the level of the final boss. Then all of a sudden you've made the final boss too easy. Instead, if you just have a variable experience cap, set it equal to 100, and then you use that without the code, throughout the code, anytime you want to change that value, you can just go up to the top and do that. So that is why Java yells at you so angrily about magic numbers. It's so that you can write good, clean, concise code with single points of control. Okay. And any like explanation that's even semi-close to that would probably get you 2 points. Unless you said a magic number is a number that makes me feel happy.
Will you say that one more time so you can write good, clean code with big?
Single point of control is the optimal, not the optimal, like the important words there. That's why we want to not use magic numbers, because we want to have single point of control over values in our code. Hey, look, it's the question we just did. Double x equals 1 divided by 2 would be 0.0. Like I said, they love adding questions like these because they trip a lot of people up. Sometimes they're mean. Sometimes they try to trick you. It's not fun. Okay. All right, we could do the tracing table here. Actually, it's not even that bad. We could just write it on the screen. Okay. 1, 2. Oh, it's less than 0. And then to say I. All right, so after I set equal to 1, I will be equal to 1. After j is set equal to 2, semicolon, I will still be equal to 1. And separate lines. Oh, we're gonna do like we're gonna do like this. And j is set equal to 2. All right, is 1 less than 2? Oh wait. Values do not change. I still set equal to 1. J is still set equal to 2. We say I equals I times I plus 1. So 1 times 1 is 1 plus 1 is 2. I is equal to 2. J still equal to 2. J equals J plus 2. I still equal to 2. J now looks like it is 4. Okay. Back up to the top because we've reached the bottom of our semicolon, not our semicolon, our curly brace here. Is we go back up here, we use these values. So is 2 less than 4? It's the only person awake right now. Values get updated, we cross them out, and we set them equal to the new values. That's how we indicate that another iteration of the while loop has continued. So make sure you're crossing out your old values and replacing them with the new ones. I equals I times I plus 1. So 2 equals, or I equals 2 times 2 plus 1, which is 5. J still remains at 2, but you still want to cross it out to show that at this point in the second iteration, J is equal to 2. So even if the value does not update, please still do that. Please still do that. All right. J equals J plus 2. I is still 5. 4 plus 2 is 8. J did get updated. My bad. I'm stupid. Disregard everything I just said, but the point still stands. If the value doesn't update, still cross it out and replace it with another value. It was a test, and I caught myself. I passed that time. Okay. 6. All right. Is 5 less than 6? Yes. 1 person awake. Beautiful. Okay. Back to the while loop. Value gets copied. 5. 6. I equals I plus I times I plus 1. So 26. Big numbers here. This value does get updated. 26. And then plus 2 is 8. All right. Is 26 less than 8? No. So we break out of the while loop. And finally, down here, we have I equals 26. J equals 8. You'll notice we did not update any of the variables before the code because they never go back to that. They do not come back to outside of the while loop. You can't go back past the while loop. You can't time travel past the while loop. How we show iteration within a while loop, cross out the old values. And then at the bottom, since this is the first time that we've reached this code, the only values of I and J that exist are the ones they were as we exited the while loop. A lot of people will try to like update the values of I up here. That is wrong because you're not going back to this line of code. You're staying within the while loop. Okay, questions on that tracing table? Yeah.
Is there a idea to show your old, like your old crossed out?
Yes, because that shows that you know how many iterations the while loop took. And you can trace through that. Now, if there was an if statement, I'm not going to go into it, but if we skip over a block of code because of an if statement, remember that you must include a slash or a dash or a blank space, something to indicate that we're still going through the while loop, but we skipped over that block or iteration of code. So it might look something like, if it was every other thing, it would be like 1, maybe, and then you do like dash, 3, dash, 5. And then let's say that the else statement would look something like 2, dash, 4, dash. So every other one, we're going into an if else block. Questions? Cool. That's a 17-point question. So make sure you're good with tracing tables. All right. Write the body of this method returns the smallest value in A. So like I said, you will potentially, probably, almost guaranteed have a coding question, wink, wink, nudge, nudge, on the exam. So make sure you're comfortable writing code on paper without Eclipse's check style or spot bugs yelling at you if you miss a semicolon or something. Make sure you understand syntax. Usually it won't be anything too crazy. Like we're not going to have you like hard code like a bunch of if else while loops because that seems pedantic, but you will have to write simple code. All right. Returns the smallest value in A. Who wants to devise an algorithm or a strategy on how we are going to do this? Or think about it for a few seconds, and then when I turn around, hopefully there's a hand raised. Awesome. What is it?
Set a minimum, like minimum, so A or say you do like A is 0, and then for I is 0.
Wait, pause right there. Sorry. Okay, int min equals A0. Why does that work? What happens if I pass in, say, A test equals just a blank array, and then I try to call this method? Why? Yes.
No, like I wouldn't know.
So what happens? Exactly. So you're allowed to set it equal to the first element as a placeholder minimum value because the value, or sorry, the length of the array has to be at least 1. You have to have at least 1 value. Okay. So we set a minimum value equal to A of 0, and then what's the next step? So for, where do we want to start it? Okay. Cool. All right, and then we're inside the loop. What do we do now? If yeah, this would 100% work. This is actually how I would do it. One note, is there, yeah.
Instead of using the A of I did like character equals character adds, does that still work? Is that wrong?
I would say no, because they're not characters, they're integers. There's one way this code could be improved by one computation. Who knows what it is?
To write int I equals 1, because there is no reason to compare A of 0 with A of 2.
Yeah, exactly. So if you wanted a code that would run one computation cycle, probably a nanosecond faster, you could start it at the first index because we've already checked the first element. See if it's the minimum. Yeah.
That means like the line has to be there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I, as the implementer, can assume that an array of at least one element is going to be passed to me because of the requires clause. Yeah. No, it would still work because okay, so A test equals 4. We go into the test and then min gets set equal to 4, and then A dot length is equal to 1. So we're doing 1 less than 1. 1 is not less than 1, it's equal to 1, so just immediately exit out. Okay, and then why is the why? Hello. Why is this I is less than A dot length and not A less than or equal to A dot length? We kind of just went over it, kind of sort of maybe, yeah.
Because if it was equal, it'd be like outside.
Yes, because we start indexing at 0 instead of 1. So always want to be less than. Okay, Yes.
You can use a for loop with a query.
Yeah, you could. For loops are basically just while loops, but condensed down. So you could 100% say like, int I equals 1. And then instead of having a for loop, you could say while I less than a dot length. And then what you would have to do is you just have to include your I plus plus down here. So it's all the same components of the for loop, but just broken up. So you have int I equals 1, I less than length, I plus plus. Okay. Yeah.
You have to like follow check style for this or no?
I would say probably not. Like, I'm not going to dock you points if you say int I equals 1. I'm not going to say, magic number. You get a 0. Yeah. If it's something egregious, actually, I don't think there would be a case where it would be egregious. The only thing you think about is like magic numbers. And if you're debating whether or not it's a magic number, it's probably not. Because if it was a magic number, you would know it's a magic number. Yeah.
Would you get points off if you the length of while loop to make sure that you don't have to create them?
Like an if statement checking if the length of the array was greater than or equal to 1. I would say yes. Let me see. Usually, I don't know why it's not written here, but it'll say do not use any complexities or inefficiencies, and that would be a complexity or an inefficiency because we know that it has to be greater than or equal to 1. Cool. Any questions on this coding question? All right. Clearly and concisely explain why the precondition is important here. Okay. Anyone want to take a stab at that? I feel like we covered it a bit. All right. What is the minimum element of this array? This one right here, just an empty array. What is the minimum element of that?
Index 0.
There is no index 0. It's empty. Oh, so what would be the minimum element? Nothing. There is no minimum element of an empty array. So it's important that there's at least one element in the array because there is no minimum element of an empty array. So that's why the precondition is important. You can't return the smallest value in A if there are no values in A. It just doesn't make sense. Okay. Okay. Trace the effect of the line of the code below that calls square and reset by tracing the execution of the method body square and reset for this call. Okay, so it's another tracing table. Awesome. Okay, we're just going to do it like, I'm just going to call it like what the variable should be. Okay, so when you pass in double x, what is the value of x going to be in this case? If we call double sq equals square and reset num, and num is 13.0, 13.0, because the value gets passed. And then we call double square equals x times x. So x in this case will be what? 13.0, it remains unchanged, and square will be equal to 169.0. X gets set equal to 0.0, so x is equal to now what? 0.0, and square is still 169.0. We return square, so afterwards, what will the value of num be? 13.0. It's passed by value, so the number does not get updated, but what will the value of SQ be? 169, because we're returning that value back. Questions on this? This is just another trying to get you with the pass by value thing. It's trying to get you to say that the value of num should be 0.0 in this case because we set x equal to 0.0. Do not fall for it. It's a pitfall. It's a trick. It's Bucci trying to mess with your mind. Okay, questions on this one? All right. Okay. Complete the body of main so that it prompts the user for a password candidate until either the password candidate is the empty string or the password candidate is acceptable according to is okay. In our formal specifications for a mathematical string such as password, password means the length of the password. So this just means length of password. Okay. So as you can see, we are both the client and the implementer in this case. So we are the client in the sense that we're using this is okay method, which we do not know what it is. But if we look at the requires clause, we have to pass it a string that is at least greater than 0 in length. And then we can assume that it's going to tell us whether or not it is okay. So that's cool. We don't have to write any code for that. We just have to make sure that the value is going to be greater than 0. Okay. One thing, sometimes they will ask questions, they will ask coding questions that says, here is an example input. And it's like enter in a positive number, colon space. And it will be like, copy the exact prompt that the user uses. And Bucci will be really annoying, and he'll say, if they don't copy the prompt exactly as it is written in the example, take off points. So if you say enter in a positive number and you forget a semicolon, I am forcibly, through, I guess, the contract that I signed, forced to take off points for that. So make sure that you're reading the question entirely. In this case, it looks like it just doesn't give an example. So we can prompt it for anything. Okay. So what's the first thing that we should do? Who wants to take a stab at this coding question? Okay, we have 5 minutes, so I'll just give what I would. So first we have to out dot print. I'll say like enter password. That's okay, and then I'll say string b for password equals in dot next line. I'll get the password and then I'll say while b dot length. What does it ask? It's while it is. So either the password candidate is the empty string. So while b dot length is not equal to 0. Or it is an acceptable password according to is okay. Or while it is not, is okay. And then I want to say out print line. No. And then, or I guess we'll say out print no new password. You should probably write something a little bit better than that, but sure. And then we say p equals in okay, that's like pretty much it. While p dot length is not equal to 0 or is okay. Question here, would this work? While not is okay, or p dot length is not equal to 0. Also, let me double check something. Until either the password candidate is the empty string. Okay, yeah, I think that would work. Would this work? Yes or no? Tell me why. Yeah. Exactly. So is okay requires that the length has to be greater than 0. So why does ours work in the first case? Yes, exactly. So while is, oh wait, technically it wouldn't work. Is that what you were gonna say?
If you put in a password that is okay, and it's longer than 0, what happens? When it just says, still say no new password.
Password or not is okay. Okay. Here's how you fix it. This should be an and, I think. Right. So while now, if at least one of those is true, then it'll break out of the while loop. Okay, and that so yeah, it should be and then the reason that this works is because short circuit evaluation will kick in if it is the empty password. So it won't even check that second part. where we have to make sure that the password that the user entered in is greater than. So it should be an and, not an or. That's where I messed up. Okay. I'm like a good 67% sure that that works. Okay. Oh, questions? Yeah.
Don't also have the argument. How is it gonna work?
Like this. This is that 33% that I said. So you're right, it's wrong. I was testing you. You passed. You passed it, Pete. It's like that. Sorry, I forgot about the argument. Is that what you were gonna say? Okay, somebody else had their hand up.
Wait, does it say in the question the order? So.
So either the password is the empty string, or the password candidate is acceptable. Yeah. So while it's not either of those, it'll continue to run. So as long as one of those is password.length equals 0, does not equal 0. Yeah, so as soon as one of those is the case, then it'll like break out, right? So if it's just the empty string, password.length is not equal to 0. That is false. And doesn't matter what that is because since both of them are not true, it'll break out. And then if it is okay, that second one will be false and it'll break out. Otherwise. Okay. Questions? Comments, concerns? All right. Wednesday, what did I say? 6 to 7? You record that. Yeah, I will record it and I'll put it on YouTube. But there will be like 30-minute live. You're not even ready. Thank you. Yeah, have a good one.
You submit a request,
Mhm.
is it normal for it to not do anything after?
Yeah, it should take a few days for them to respond and get you the exam materials. Yep.
Yeah. So what the double straight line means is it the same as the double ampersands or is?
No, double straight lines is or.
Or, okay.
Double and is and. So two Boolean conditions. And will only return true if both of them are true, or will return true if either of them are
Okay.
true.
All right, thank you.
Yeah.
Or.
Hey.
How are we like supposed to answer this question?
Yeah, so which area is larger, the shaded figure left, a circle describe the shaded figure on the right, or a circle describe the section just for answer, clear, concise terms. So,
We have to just like apply geometry,
yeah, it would just be,
both are equivalent.
like. Right, I think so. You'd have to use the formula for the area of a circle. I don't know why that's on there. There are no extra credit credits.
Not related to.
It's not, yeah, I don't know why that's on there.